And yes, we are live. We are live. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Rob Wallace, and this is the Zero Noize podcast, where we engage in progressive discussions about hip hop life and everything in between with our guests. Again, my name is Rob Wallace. I am an educator, school leader, and scholar of hip hop. Through my study, I lift hip hop as both the subtext and the product of American culture, a medium of liberation and the literature of the search for freedom. I regard the hip hop album as critical discourse about life and the interpretation of life in America by those who create it. These are the rules of engagement. We discuss hip hop albums within the context of personal impact first and build out from there. Art is not valuable if it does not challenge, if it does not ask, if it does not respond. We acknowledge that music decorates time as art decorates space. It is absolutely deeper than rap. We listen through limitations of genre. We critique intent, content, and delivery of purpose. We pay homage to the artisans as well as the artists, as no album is a one-person show. We underpromise and we overperform. I ask dope people to visit with me and talk about who they are, who they have been, and what they do. I also ask them to be ready to discuss an album that played a role in them becoming them. You will not hear the music we will discuss during the show for many reasons, but you will never hear it the same afterwards. Therefore, this is a music podcast, but it is a people's podcast first. And today, that person is Noah Kaplan, and the album is Low End Theory by Tribe Called Quest. So, but first, before we talk about Low End Theory, we want to first welcome Noah Kaplan. Welcome, Noah.
Rod Wallace, so good to see you. I can't say enough about what you just said. As an artist myself, I genuinely appreciate what you just spoke about art and about music and how it impacts people. So thank you for having me. It's an honor.
It's an honor to have you here. We're happy to have you here as one of the sponsors of Zero Noize Podcast, as the CEO of Leon Speakers. We want to give a quick shout out to our other sponsors. First of all, edigging.com, where they do the digging for you. So if you are a producer, if you are a music head, go to edigging.com, and they have actually chosen samples for you already. They chop them out for you. They do all the work, especially in COVID time. So go to edigging.com. It is a subscription service. You can subscribe. It's updated on a day-to-day basis. So visit edigging.com. Also, we would be remiss not to recognize Grove Studios as one of our sponsors. Grove Studios in Ypsilanti, Michigan. You can visit them at grovestudios.space. Grove Studios is a 24/7, 365 production workspace. You can podcast there. You can produce and record music there. You can do your photography there. It's also a cool place to hang out. So hit up grovestudios.space, and we want to give a shout out to our sponsors. But for today, we're going to be speaking with Noah Kaplan. So who is Noah Kaplan?
Starting deep. Noah Kaplan is a simple person, an artist at heart, who found himself in a business role. Never have talked about myself in the third person, so that's funny. So I apologize in advance to everybody for that. But no, started out as an artist and musician, never really dreamed of creating a company or a business. It was really an organic journey for us over the last 25 years. But I've always been obsessed with sort of the vision of how art and audio interact, and also how design technology kind of overlay. So the intersections of those disciplines, art, audio, design, technology, and actually now we talk a lot about how business and bohemia intersect, because as an artist, I still like to live immersed in an art world, not at all interested in corporate life. So I've surrounded myself with people who are really amazing at business, who really allowed me to be myself and live out this vision for Leon Speakers and also as a person.
That is the dream right there for an artist. let all the suits do the suit stuff. When's the last time you wore a suit, Noah?
I had a very challenging time in my late 30s where I put on the sport jacket, and I did the thing. I had a sport jacket, I had tailored pants and all the things. I had a watch, all those things on. I had to play that role for a brief moment, but you know what? That brief moment did not fit me well. It fit me at the time in my late 30s. That's like kind of post reckoning, post becoming yourself. But I remember the last time I put one on, I was like, this thing doesn't work anymore. So hung up all the suits, all the jackets, put them away. And I can say now that my wardrobe has become moderately homogenous with black t-shirts, black jeans, and hoodies. So I apologize for that. I've tried to wear color for today because,
Listen, don't apologize for it. I wore suits and shirts and ties for 20 years, and I have liberated my closet. I am a hoodie, jeans, boots, Rockports. Don't tell anybody. Rockport, beads, beanies. Today's hoodie is brought to you by Double Negative People, by the way. Double Negative People. Hit me up. Hit me on Instagram. DM me on Instagram if you're interested in getting one. Shout out to Mike Notes.
I'm hitting it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. DM me if you're interested in one. They are one of one Double Negative People for the people. But yeah, you got the uniform on today. What is this? The glasses, the beanie, the zip up hoodie. I normally have on a zip up joint, but you got me. So let's kind of take a step back and when did you first kind of realize that being an artist or being artistic was something that served you well? Like even back in childhood.
Yeah, to go way back to childhood. I think I was always a born artist. So, since as long as I could remember, or as my friends would say, forever since, I was an artist. I can remember being 3 or 4 years old and just obsessively drawing, staying in my room and drawing. Now, as a person, I'm an extrovert, but as an art, I'm obsessed. As an artist, I'm an obsessed artist. So I would lock myself in my room and draw and draw and draw. And I really never did it with any intention. The intention was just about who I was. So it was part of my identity since as long as I can remember. That said, art is a very solemn act. So I also like to participate in the world in other ways. And that's what led me sort of to sports and music and people and entertainment in general. Because I love art in terms of a meditative, like sort of piece of my life, but it never really fulfilled me in the rest of the ways. So art is a trade when it comes down to it. I had to learn a lot. And I didn't really meet my mentors or teachers till later in life. Even during college, I met some, but really my greatest mentors I met after I went to school. I went to art school at University of Michigan. But I found a person who sort of led me farther and farther along right after school. So it was after school that I really started digging into like what it means to be an artist. There is no teacher, no training for that.
Right.
The way our society works is kind of in reverse. So I kind of remember dreaming as a person and as a kid, and my teachers used to describe me as being out the window. How about you, Rod? Can you relate to that at all?
Yeah, in terms of just being in a different space.
Yeah.
Being able to see things from 10,000 feet early was something that I was able to do. I was able to see the entirety of the painting and not just the subject of the painting. So it was difficult for me to focus in on very particular details for a long time. And that affected me in school. I think, I always say that I think that I had ADD before they called it that. Because I focused on the entirety of the picture. And I think that's what happens with a lot of young people or a lot of people who may have that. It's yeah. And I see the same thing manifesting itself within music as well. They say, for example, like as far as mixing, you don't get too obsessed with one sound. Make sure that you understand how the sound fits in with everything else.
Mhm.
And I kind of do both. I kind of can hear, when I started to hear myself isolating things that I was hearing, then it was like, okay, now I can see things a little bit differently. And so, yeah, that led me towards being more of an engineer than an actual performer.
That's interesting, because I think that journey, like, especially in schools when you're young, schools aren't really oriented, or at least when we were growing up, or when I was growing up, weren't really oriented towards the arts. I was like, pushed into the PACE program, which was an arts program, but it was, it was way down the hallway away from everything else. And they probably would have considered me, ADD. I remember them testing me for all these things, and me kind of just looking them deep in the eyes and saying, yeah, I'm definitely different. I'm thinking about the world different, even at that age. This is single digit life, 9 years old, and remembering, like, yeah, I definitely see the world differently. This isn't the most interesting thing for me to be sitting in this chair and this desk. Right. Remember the feel of those desks?
Yes.
You're made out of like strange materials, and I would draw on the desk. I would draw on my notepads. I was doodling. And even at an early age, I was kind of already getting into studying art. Everything that could have meant, from graffiti on the trains all the way to, nature books. So I had a really diverse upbringing when it came to looking at art in New York.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about growing up in New York as an artist and what you saw. Like, for us who weren't raised in New York and have a deep affinity for hip hop. For me, when I was growing up, New York was like a fairy tale land. Like, you hear about the different places, and you hear about Jones Beach, and you hear about Staten Island and Shaolin and, Queensbridge.
Yeah, the boroughs.
This was something that you guys were living through. And I'm curious about how New York had an effect on you as you grew up as an artist.
It was really interesting, and New York has so many facets to it. So we moved out of the city when I was very young. We moved to a small, what I call a train stop city called Merrick, Long Island, which was on the South Shore of Merrick. So, that's where you kind of ended up in the suburbs, and your culture came from New York City. So we lived in a very small little, like, kind of normal world. But for us, I could see literally the Twin Towers from my house in Merrick. And that's meaningful because you could take a boat to the Twin Towers from my house. We grew up in a little tiny town, and to be there, moved out of the city because my mother's from the Bronx, my father's from Brooklyn. I was born in New York City, and then we moved to the island, and my whole family's still in the city. So we always looked up to the big buildings and what was going on there, and that always affected how we thought. So when you think about all the music that was being made at that time, in the 80s, 90s, it was massive in the city.
So, so when did you first start paying attention to hip hop?
This is what's so interesting about New York, because remember, this is pre everything. So a lot of what you got was from radio, or what you were exposed to was luck a lot of times. And then all the people we worked with it was a really diverse group of people we worked with. So a lot of the things I learned the most about, like, from classic rock all the way to hip hop, you were listening. I literally grew up with 8-track tapes in a Cadillac in my mother and father's car. That's real, in a tan Cadillac, with 8-track. I don't know if anybody even remembers what an 8-track tape looks like, sticking in a cartridge. Do you remember this? I don't know.
Generation check. My dad had a Mark 7.
Oh.
He had a white Lincoln Mark 7, and it was all Teddy Pendergrass, Patti LaBelle, Tyrone Davis. Yep. You know what I'm saying? Johnny Taylor, all that. So I get it.
It's the same exact thing for how we lived. And so for us, it was like a really nice mix of classic rock, hip hop, blues, jazz. Everything was sort of, my family was really it. My mother especially exposed us to tons of different kinds of music. All the way. It could have been comedy. It could have been like a comedy 8-track as much would be in the car as like a music. So we just listened to so much, everything from like Richard Pryor to the Beatles. you know, and it was so raw at that time. We didn't realize how beautiful it was and how real it was, all the recordings at that time. So, but when we really started to get into it was probably, you know, early 80s when we started to really get exposed to modern hip hop, you know, sort of what was going on the West Coast, really different on the East Coast, because, you know, early on, for whatever reason, we were super into everybody from Dana Dane to Slick Rick, Eric B. Rakim, Fat Boys, Force MDs. I mean, this is super early hip hop.
Absolutely.
You really didn't hear it on the radio. So you had to go to the village, go to the record stores, go to the tape shops, especially. And we were all tape heads. So we were always looking for the next tape, next tape, next tape.
So you talking about like Ron G, Kid Capri?
Oh, yeah. Early, you know. But, you know, and just like, you know, just straight up 2-4 hip hop.
Yeah.
Boom, cat.
Right,
you know, boom,
right.
boom, cat. And then, you know, like, but the rhymes were just so real and so part of every day that it just fit. It fit with the times. And you had classic rock on the other side. So like Z100 wasn't going to play all the hip hop anymore. At the time, there were hip hop channels, but it was early. And
one of the first rap songs that, you know, when I was born in 77, and I mean, I remember the Sugar Hill Gang. I remember hearing that at like a distant cousin's house in Ohio when I was young. And I, you know, I used to sit in the barbershop and read I said this before. I used to sit in the barbershop and I used to read the top 20 singles in Jet out loud, and I was like 3. You know,
how about Source and
no, the Source was late. Now you know the Source was later.
I know it was later, but that was like what
came after like Black Beat, Right On.
Right.
Songs that I remember from hip hop was New York, New York by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. And like I said, so my cousin, and it's a song on the last tape I put out called Paul Kennedy, where I'm talking about him him playing that song was one of my first memories. And in the song, like I said, for us that loved hip hop, New York was like this fairy tale land of culture. In the rhymes, it says, a castle in the sky, 1 mile high, built to shelter the rich and greedy, rows of eyes disguised as windows, looking down on the poor and the needy. So there was this place of contrast. It was a great contrast of grandiose wealth, grandiose progress. Yeah. Meanwhile, at the time, from what I know about New York was buck wild.
It was wild.
The streets.
It was straight up insane. It was, and we didn't know from enough to know. You know, we couldn't get a full grasp of it because we didn't really go to all the places. Like, you know, we went to very specific parts of the city. You know, we spent a lot of time in the village at the record shops, went to the East Village a lot. And, you know, like, but we really, you know, Brooklyn, Bronx, even, you know, Spanish Harlem, all the other places where all the sick music was coming out of. It was really different. You know, this is New York at its rawest. And so you definitely knew what was okay and what wasn't okay, you know? Right. And that was real. That was very real. You know, and knowing your place and knowing who you are and understanding that whole culture was serious.
Right. And I mean, let's just keep it a buck. So rap was, you know, a predominantly African-American and Latino construct in New York. And here you were as a young Jewish kid, right?
Yeah.
And so how did hip hop frame your understanding of kind of intersectionality in a way? What role did hip hop play in your understanding of like class and race as a dynamic around you?
Well, I have to give extreme props to my friends who I grew up with. Luckily, we all worked at a summer camp together. And so us, you know, Jewish kid from Merrick got to spend a lot of time with our friends that we worked with. And we went to the summer camp, which was like our haven.
Right.
And from the South Bronx. And so they exposed us to just amazing amount of music. And just really also the life that they were living was really different. But when we were all together in the wilderness, when we considered the country, which was upstate New York, which is the country,
right.
We would all be working in the kitchen. We worked together. We were super close. We grew up together. Frank, Nitty, everybody, you know who I'm talking about, Lebo and Ramel, like these, like we all learned together from each other. And so we had a super tight relationship. So they exposed us to so much amazing music, you know, and we exposed them to our music and to different ways of life. And what you find out about life, in my opinion, is that not only are we all seeking the same thing, but people just want to be comfortable with each other. You know, no one really wants conflict. Nobody wants to grow up in fear. And it was really important for me and lucky that I got exposed to all different types of cultures in New York early on, to know that there is a lot of hardship that I just could never understand. You know, and our main mentor, H, who was like the elder of everybody from the Bronx, you know, like I remember him telling me a story when he came back from the city, and there was bullet holes in the side of his car, straight up bullet holes. And H was fine. H was calm. And he was kind of like the father for all of us. And my father was kind of like the father for all of us too. But my father was a doctor. My father was a caregiver. H was our caregiver on that kind of cultural side. And we all listened to H, and just listened to how it was and how fearless he grew up and how much hardship there was for no reason. Always was heartbreaking and ridiculous. And, you know, it doesn't make sense. So when you don't understand, you know, I was too young to understand everything at that time. But it wasn't about understanding at that time. We had the most fun you could ever imagine. I mean, when, you know, I was constantly mocked. I think I'm like, my nickname was Shorty Shit Stay until I was like 14 years old.
Wait a minute. Now,
I was literally 4'5" when I was a tiny man.
It was a Wu-Tang dude named Shorty Shit Stain too. Now,
hey,
was that like something that people called each other back in New York at that time?
It was what they called me, and I'm okay with that because it was fun. I'm like, we all were that close, you know, like, but and they'll be laughing when they see this, but I remember when I graduated, probably when I was like 15 or 16, they're like, all right. They saw that I had kind of ways about myself.
You grew up.
I came into my art self. They were like, all right, kid could draw. So we used to do tags. We used to draw. We dreamed of like making brands. We dreamed of a brand called Fizo Funk. We wrote
for clothes.
We dreamed of clothes. We dreamed of walls. We tagged. We did it all. But it was really lucky to get exposed to that, especially coming from Long Island, which was kind of honestly homogenous and broken up not only by culture, but by socioeconomic class, religion. It was ridiculous, you know, like, and it still kind of is, honestly. You know, you have boroughs, and it wasn't bad. There was an honor to it all. Everybody understood what was going on, but it was definitely different than I could ever explain.
I understand. So you go from this affinity for art, this affinity for urban culture, you go to University of Michigan, and now you're in the Midwest.
Midwest.
I don't know if it's, you know, Ann Arbor tends to be, Ann Arbor is a little bit, it's a little baby cosmopolitan place a little bit in a way. So was it a big culture shock for you to come to the Midwest with your viewpoints of the big city?
One of the craziest things that could have happened, I won't say that I was aloof, but I definitely was always dreaming, you know. So how I got into, like, how I went to the university was kind of one of those miracle stories. Like, I was a straight artist, so I always thought I was going to, you know, Pratt University or RISD. So I went to a portfolio review in the city at Pratt University, never dreaming that I would be in the Midwest. I always dreamed that, you know, I'd be a New York artist, or because my whole family is still there.
Right.
And they already were New York artists, and they were living there, and they still are. But so I always imagined that lifestyle. But my mother took me to this portfolio review, and my mother went to University of Michigan, and she said, "Noah, show your art to this guy at the University of Michigan." I'm like, Michigan? I don't even know where is that? And I'm sorry, Michigan, but I did think that in my mind. Uh, but finally, I went and showed the professor from Michigan the art, and for whatever reason, we actually connected for real. We actually connected. So he was asking me a lot of questions about the art, and I'll never forget. He asked me this one question where he said, "Noah, why did you draw this portrait with crayons, all these colors of crayons?" And I looked at him and I said, because I had a box of 64 of them. And he's like, "I want you to come to University of Michigan." And he said, "How are your grades?" I was like, "They're fine." And sure as shit, I ended up getting an acceptance letter from University of Michigan. I didn't apply in a normal way. And that was one of those 1 second things that changed the whole course of your life. And it's indescribable. So when I got to the Midwest, because I was in the art school, it was a very small microcosm of reality, but still a cultural shock, living out here and, thinking the thoughts that I had versus the thoughts that when I got to a dorm. Like, I literally came here, I packed a green duffel bag, I took my radio, I had a boombox, I had a duffel bag and a boombox, and I got on a plane. And I showed up and I was like, "Give me a cab to the university." And they're like, "What do you mean?" Like, Michigan. I'm like, because I didn't know you were supposed to go with your parents and they would help you move in. So I showed up there alone in a room.
Oh my.
And it was great though, because I had my tape collection and my duffel bag and I had my radio and I had a few clothes. So I got to Michigan with just that. And when I look around me now, I could have never expected the life that I would lead. I never thought about being in business or making speakers or what kind of art I'd be doing. So it's kind of hysterical looking back on it all, as you know.
Yeah. And for the people out there, Noah again he did build a company called Leon Speakers that offers high-end audio that builds in by design the artistic desires of the customer.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how, because I think the one thing that's being missed, I think that we hear a lot about the artistic side, but there's also a tech side. And one of my theories is that hip hop is born of technology and it bears technology. Like hip hop and technology have intertwined for the entire time from its inception. The use of the turntables being different, the use of the building of sampling technology, the building of audio technology, the boombox and car audio and home audio would never have been what it has become without hip hop. As well as music production, the strides that we've taken in terms of audio availability for audio manipulation availability for the consumer. All of that stuff is because of hip hop. So where did the art piece seems to be very clear, the music piece came in, but there's a very big tech side to what you do as well.
Well, for sure, because as I mentioned before, like, art was sort of my trade. It was what I was born with. But it really didn't give me like the social outlet or the outlet in general that I needed as sort of a person, like an extrovert. So what ended up happening was I remember stealing my friend's guitar because I didn't steal it. I mean, he had a lot of guitars. So I was like, "Hey, can I borrow this thing?" And I started strumming, I remember. And then I became, really entrenched in learning guitar. Learning myself how it worked. And then we did slowly form bands and we jammed, we played and we recorded. And once you're in a studio and you see all the bright lights, and the knobs and the buttons, on mixing boards, and start understanding what it all is, which was much later after I played for a long time. Obviously, technology has a lot to do with all those things. And so you end up learning a lot about the signal path, how would you get from your voice to playback? And that signal path is kind of, it's beautiful. It's intrinsically complex. But if you really understand at a certain point, and when we were growing up, it was understanding on an analog level, which meant, you have to understand the microphone. What kind of microphone are you going to, when you sing into it, a microphone is kind of like a reverse speaker. So when you sing into a Neumann, it's a beautiful piece of technology that's been around for so long. 50, 60, 70 years of these amazing. And, I just became completely enamored with all this equipment. It was amazing to learn about it, but mostly because I always felt like a student of technology, like a student of music, and I still feel like a student of art. I'm not a good teacher, so it makes me be a student.
Mhm.
So I just started looking at the objects themselves, and I really fell in love with what they look like. How were they made? The branding on them. Everything from that all the way to the Tascam 4-track, and then when we hit 2-inch tape, and then you're looking at all these mixing boards, how these mixing boards work, and it took a long time to make sense of it all. But yeah, hip hop and the technology and how it's all intertwined, it's immense. And then learning about the history here in Motown, of course, where the most amazing music in the world was made. I got into that once I got into the Midwest. And so it was more than hip hop. It was also just like, learning about Motown and how that all went down, how Barry Gordy created an ecosystem of love that is immeasurable in a small space using the most basic technologies that were so well made. But the technologies are one thing, and then the passion, creativity, like you were talking about in the beginning of the show, what you bring to it. Because art, what did you say? You could say it much better, Rod. You always speak, you could say it better. Like at the beginning of the show, the impact that art should have needs to come from not only
if it's not valuable if it doesn't challenge you,
right?
It's valuable if it doesn't challenge you to think differently, or if it doesn't either ask or it answers a question.
Yeah, and it has to. And so the technology is actually dormant. The technology needs to be used by an artist. So it's a paintbrush, like a Norman mic is a paintbrush.
Right. It's not. It doesn't act in soulless. It has to be manipulated.
Right. And so the way it's broken and the way it's pushed forward, like if you think about, people who really push the art forward, like Stevie Ray Vaughan or Jimi Hendrix, who pushed electric guitar over the edge of the waterfall.
Right.
They did that using the same guitar and the same amplifier as anybody else ever had. They just realized that there was more soul, more destruction you could put into it to get better sounds out of it. And I feel like that's the same thing that hip hop learned. Like, how did we get from something so basic? And, truth be told, Rod, I was super obsessed with dub reggae. So, right. So as much as I loved hip hop, as much as I loved classic rock, dub reggae was something that also I blew my mind.
Right.
Like echoes and overlays and dubs and collaboration. It was massive. I mean, I would be flipping through all the records trying to find the new thing, Sly and Robbie and but all those things, bass and drums.
Right.
And where do you go from there?
Vibrations
and, sound has that magic. Music has that magic that it's just an endless palette, just it's all paint to me.
Right.
Technology is part of the colors of the paint. So
why did you stay in Ann Arbor? Why Ann Arbor? Why didn't you? And maybe it was just a matter of chance, but I'm curious about why you chose to keep this venture in Ann Arbor and not move back towards everything that you know and everything that you grew up knowing as an artist.
So there's luck and heartache there. So I had met a woman, and I did, and that woman is now the wife.
Yeah.
And so she was still going to school here, but through another friend that I met, Stan, he worked at the university athletic department, and he was a potter. And they wanted to do the University of Michigan wanted to do a series of portraits of their scholar athletes over the last 80 years. And so Stan, who was the artist in the athletic department, they were like, "Hey, Stan, do you know anybody who knows how to draw portraits?" Stan called me. He said, "Hey, Noah, I have this thing. It's a commission. I want to know if you know how to draw portraits." I'm like, "Yeah, I draw portraits." So I showed up to the athletic department with my portfolio at the time and showed them Yeah, I could draw portraits. Now, little did I know that I was meeting with like the president of the athletic department.
Okay.
It was like a serious corporate thing. I had no idea. I was not prepared for it.
Right.
But you know, we handled it, and I got that commission, and so I ended up getting the commission to draw over 40 portraits of University of Michigan scholar athletes, which kept me in Ann Arbor. It gave me enough revenue as, you know, as an artist to be able to not only create art, but also to play maniacal amounts of music, to procrastinate instead of doing that job.
Right.
And so that's why I ended up staying. And that job took me almost 9 months. We started a band then. That's when we started the first business. Leon, two of my other friends who are musicians, they stayed along. And one was a writer and one was an incredible musician. My two business partners and Leon. And so we started an art gallery. We started building products. We started a pirate radio station. It was just an epically creative time of life. But still, no idea that I'd stay here forever. And the tragic part was, you know, 9/11, when we did have a plan actually to open up space in New York City, which we had a space, we had a spot, and then 9/11.
9/11 said nope.
9/11 was not having that years later, and you know, oh my God! I mean, you know, I remember I'll never forget it because I flew back from New York to Michigan the day before.
Wow.
Yeah. And then my mom called me, watching the towers burn from the window of my house.
Wow.
Yeah, that's dark. And so what I mean by heartache, like that was just unimaginable times.
Wow.
You looked up at those things as a kid, you know, at those towers with reverence, you know, and that was like in another world. Those were the buildings you didn't know how did that happen?
It's a part of the lore. Like, to me, it's kind of a part of the lore of New York City. Not only the towers themselves, but the towers falling is now a part of the lore of the city, the city in the world. You know what I'm saying? So I get
unimaginable. So yeah, but that really rooted us here, you know, and so we really dug into the company and business we had built here.
Right.
We figured out what's going on. We built our little factory. It turns out Michigan and the Midwest is an amazing place to build products, to build a community of artisans and craftsmen and thinkers. And because of the automotive history of Michigan and also the music history of Michigan, there's amazing amounts of knowledge that the Midwest holds. And you know what? In the Midwest, like now I'm like a Midwesterner, right? Because we do the damn work here. We build shit from scratch every day. You know, I'm in this morning, I was cleaning studio, working in the studio, go to the next thing, you know, build products, oversee what everybody's doing. Right. There's projects going on like crazy. You know, we had, you know, there's 50, 60 craftsmen working at Leon now.
Right.
You know, yeah. So, but this is where we do the damn work. And so I don't think we could have done this in New York. Obviously could have done it in the city where we have a factory and machines and people who know how to run machines. I remember something was different when in like the second little, I won't call it a factory, it was more like a shop. I knew things had changed when I was driving a forklift.
Listen, hey, my shout out to Jason Wilson from Detroit, Keva Adulam. He says, if you can't be the janitor, you can't be the CEO.
I completely agree with that.
If you're not going to do the dirty work, you can't do the clean work either.
Oh, you cannot. I mean, I worked in the factory for the first 15. We didn't know what a factory was. 15 years, you know, like building the products, designing the products, making the products.
Right.
But I agree with that. Like, and you know what? You should never stop being the janitor.
So in terms of going from concept to team building to failing up, you know, how can you advise, or how would you advise, especially creators involved in growing a business? Because as creators, we operate differently than people who step to the venture with a business paradigm. We tend to need brand new innovation. We tend to be idea people. We tend to experience discouragement
Mm.
when things don't work out. So how would you advise creators who are increasingly in more control of their own brand, their own business, their own merch, their own entities?
I talk like that's an amazing question, first of all. And the way I see it is there's multiple types of currency that we overlook, right? So the monetary money is one of those currencies. Another currency is, you know, there's social currency, there's artistic currency, there's just general, like, what is your life, what is your vision, what is your mission? And so if you want to be a creator, I always think about, like, what is the next 1,000 days going to look like? How do you want those next 1,000 days to go? And so if you're starting a venture, if you're starting a business, I was born as a hustler, so I like to do not just one thing. I always wanted some form of cash flow. And I think getting cash to flow is one of those things that is so hard. It's become easier now with social media.
Mhm.
But when we were young, this is crazy, but I had one simple gift that made me a successful artist. And that was curiosity, right? And the question. So to all creators, what I would say is, are you willing to ask the question? And the question is this simple. I remember as an artist, the first thing I did was, after I got that first job, I called for my next job. I called a literal random restaurant. And I said, hi, my name is Noah. I'm an artist. Do you have any work that you need an artist to do? I literally called a damn restaurant. And the person who picked up the phone happened to be the director of one of the most important restaurant entity groups in the entire region. That dude put me to work for 5 years from that one question. And then even just like, Rod, the simplicity of the question, like, hey, can I make you a piece of art? And what are you going to say to that question, Rod, if I say, hey, Rod, do you want a piece of art?
Absolutely.
Right. And honestly, that's the simplicity of what I've learned over the years, is that I want to create for people. And I'm willing to ask that question. Do you want something for your home that's done for you? Do you want something in your life that will enrich your life? And like, so without shame, I believe in shameless self-promotion, but in a humble atmosphere, so like if you look at my desk right now, I sketch and draw all day still. There's my whole desk is always going to be covered with drawings. And if people want them, I'm going to give them to you. And so I was never afraid to sell something for $10 or $10,000,
How do you determine what's worth $10 and what's worth 10,000?
I can tell you from my perspective, there is one piece I created that was priceless. That people tried to buy from me, and I didn't allow it to happen.
And before you go any further, let me say this. Leon Speakers is a sponsor of the Zero Noise podcast. And I do want to talk about the other connection that we have involving the Amplify Fellowship. I definitely want to talk as well. But if you go to Leon Speakers, it's a bunch of stuff at once. It is a broadcast studio with a stage and instruments and all that. It is an office building with offices and speakers that's made out of like Wu-Tang symbols and dragons and stuff. It is a factory, a full-fledged factory with complete manufacturing and everything, with a distribution dock bay or whatever it's called or whatever. But the thing that sticks out most to you is the fact that it's a museum of technology that probably was not, it was, some of it was consumer level in 1953.
Yeah.
And now, and now,
well said.
There's technology that's there that is old, and it really, when you walk in there, it is really like you're in a place that kind of helps you to understand how important the connection between technology and art is. So when you talk about things being priceless, you have things in there that are technically priceless.
For sure. I mean, to me, the objects that were created in the past, the creativity level, like if you think about capturing sound, that happened in the late 1800s when when it was figured out that you can actually capture a sound wave on wax. Think about, to me, it's so mind-blowing, that thought and how far it carried us into the future, or that you could transfer an image onto a piece of tin or silver. And then that people at that time with no machines, even before electricity, were making products that, even with candles and imagery and paintings, that were there to kind of represent culture. Like, yeah, there's one piece that we have that was made in 1880 called a Sciopticon, where not only did they make the machine and how it worked, it was powered by a gas lamp and it would project it's like a projector. But if you look up Sciopticon, and I don't remember when I became completely obsessed with this kind of technology or thoughts, or what was the dawn of technology. And the cool thing about technology, the dawn of technology was not that long ago, 150 years ago, 160 years maybe. So it's a brief history. It's this much history. It's all wind. So it's for me, I could look at it and explore it. And so the reason it's all here and the reason it is priceless is because I want to pay reverence to the people who got us to where we are, to all those creatives that got us to where we are. So any object I see, and this is obviously my artistic bias, is there is not a thing that you look around you that wasn't created by an artist or a designer or a thinker, and so when I look at these things, I'm like, how the hell did they capture that? How did they do this? How did they become great? Yeah. Exactly. Yep.
I'm sorry.
No worries. I was lip reading. I hear you.
Inspired them to create it. I'm sorry. I muted myself. So,
yeah, I know we just went a little deep. I'm sorry about that.
No, this is a podcast of the people. It's right. Not about music. But I do want to talk about, you have success. You build a company, an international imprint, distribution all over the planet, retailers across the globe, doing what you want to do, able to collect shit that you love. And 2020 comes, and you are affected by what you see. In a pandemic, there is social unrest that is really, I want to call it a culmination, but it's more so a reminder to a degree of what is really happening as a subtext in our country. The death of George Floyd, the death of Breonna Taylor, and you and your team decide to do something about it. Talk about how that idea kind of came about and what those conversations were like that led to the Amplify Fellowship.
I mean, through the whole pandemic and through at Leon, we're a family company here, right? And we're a diverse family company. And so through the entire thing, we all felt, now, number one, that we were connected in a different way, not only politically at Leon, but in a much deeper way, experiencing not only the joys, but the pains and everything that goes along with life in modern times. And so not only with the social unrest, but with the political unrest, we weren't okay for the last number of years.
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it was way off. I think that the culture, the vibe, everything felt like it was off the rails compared to how we live life, as a family of people. we want to learn from each other. Like, and so we believe, like, I think it's an artistic thing to believe that you will never get better. Just, homogeny does not vibe at all with artistic creativity. It's insane to think that it would. And so especially when the George Floyd incident happened and we all watched together, something that everybody already knew about, something that we've seen systemically in this country for our whole lifetimes, because I'm 47 years old.
Right.
And when you think about this country, people, like, if you can't see this, it's unimaginable to me, considering that when you think about voting rights, when was women's voting? Right, it was 1950. Women in this country couldn't vote 70 years ago. Women couldn't. And so to think that there's not some systemic, when, and then you start thinking about where we are today and people who can deny the fact that there is systemic racism and there's issues that we got to face and that we got to work on things, seemed completely insane to us. And so just honestly, together, we wanted to just work, learn, listen, and understand how we could do whatever it takes to play our part to create a more equitable society.
Well, so the Amplify Fellowship, Noah and his team had some conversation with Grove Studios, who I was working with as the educational programs coordinator at that time. We had built some partnerships with some different entities in Washtenaw County to provide a lot of different support for their programs. And when this came about, there was a company that was in Ann Arbor, the way I saw it, there's a company in Ann Arbor that wants to figure out a way to amplify Black voices. So we developed a large amount of programs, with the fellowship really being the first stage. And myself and Maya Evans, shout out to Maya. Who works tirelessly.
She does. As does Rod Wallace, if I can say.
What's up with both of us?
I'm gonna just stop it right there, just to shout out to Rod Wallace. The way you framed the vision, built the vision. How do we create something that's not just of the moment, or something that's like, a social media stunt or whatever, that is completely uninteresting. We needed a 5-year vision.
Right.
And Rod, without you, we couldn't have figured out exactly how to do it right. And we are so blessed to have the most amazing artists, not only here at Leon,
right,
but here in our county. And
yeah, absolutely.
But Rod, you're much better at like capturing vision and capturing mission, I think, than almost anybody I've ever met. And so
what I'll tell you was, in terms of creating what the vision should look like, I really looked at it from kind of like a stem to stern kind of perspective, and looked at the fact that if your interest is in amplifying and supporting African Americans in the county, is multifaceted. There are a lot of great community organizations that are doing the work to support the needs of African Americans in Washtenaw County, and I wanted to make sure they got support. I wanted to make sure that artists could eliminate barriers for artists to be able to create the art that they want to create, because it's still a money game. My man Brandon Scarborough said, if you want to blow up, it takes 100 racks in 1 year. If you can spend $100,000 on your music, you can blow up. And a lot of artists don't have that. So if we could chip into that, that would be great. But also look at what kind of opportunities are available to expose our young people to the nuances that's involved in an international business that's based around technology and art. So we built all of those things at the same time. And so now we have Kenyatta Rashawn, we have Danny Darling, we have London Beck, who are all releasing projects this year. And what's funny is, I hate to put this out there, but we came to them and said, hey, let's put out an EP, and they've come back to us and say, well, we might have albums and
a lot more
opportunity that they've had. So I commend you I commend the team at Leon for helping them to make it happen. For all the people out there, follow Amplify Washington at Instagram. Follow Leon, obviously Leon Speakers. Follow us on Clubhouse, all that good stuff, or whatever, blah blah blah. So we got some great things that's coming down the pipes as far as the fellowship, but the partnership is not done either, because there's some other things that's happening with Grove. There's some other elements of the fellowship that we have in place. We have the What Now Music Industry Forum, where we've kind of shifted the conversation about the Amplify Fellowship to really being a dual meaning, where the Amplify Fellowship itself is a program that supports artists. However, we also want to amplify the fellowship of, especially in lieu of the pandemic, amplify the fellowship and networking opportunities for the music artists and music artisans around us in order to build an ecosystem. So artists in this area can get everything that they need right here. They can get publishing support. They can get legal advice. They can get video. They can get graphic design. They can get web support. They can get social media support. All of that is kind of built into what we've developed through the fellowship. And it's just been a fantastic thing.
It's been amazing to see. And, if anybody ever gets a chance to go see the Motown Museum, and they're rebuilding the Motown Museum and Barry Gordy's vision, it's not just about the music, right? It's about how to all work together to understand the business, the industry, where it's going to go, and make sure that no one's getting taken advantage of or exploited. These are important topics that nobody really knows about anymore. Like, it definitely takes a whole community to work together. And the beauty of all this is because, as I mentioned before, being a student of life, I've learned far more from the artists than they could ever learn from me.
Absolutely.
They're out there, they work, every day they're posting, they're creating, and they're fearless. And every day I look and I just smile, and there's not much more I need out of life than that. That knowing that, whatever we can do to fuel that fire, let's do more, because we're not doing enough yet.
Absolutely. There's more that we can do. And we've been blessed for those artists.
For sure.
Really brilliant, really spirit-led individuals to participate with us, who have been willing to do anything to not only help themselves become successful, but to make sure that those community organizations that we've partnered with, Our House, Ozone House, Women and Girls Working for Change here in Ypsilanti.
Also because to model it all is the most important thing. Let's all model it together. This is what it looks like. Right. This is how it's supposed to work, where everyone's working together for a common cause, and then we all rise up. And so, I think that there is just there's a renaissance of spirit going on right now. Right. And I believe in it, and I believe there's a lot more to do, and there's a lot more learning to be had. And think about the history that we learned growing up, turns out wasn't real. So
tell me what you mean.
What I mean by that is our history books weren't true.
Absolutely.
We didn't, I was a child of the 70s too. And, these portraits that we paint of everybody from Christopher Columbus all the way on up turn out not to be true. And so, let me question all things. And,
When I used to teach social studies in middle school, I used to tell my kids, there's American history and there's American lore. Now we're going to talk about American lore.
Well, you're an educator, so you have a leg up on this. Rod, I love, you as, I call you Dr. Rod because
I'm on my way. I'm coming.
Well, there's no one that needs, that's my own moniker I gave you. So, Dr. Rod, you understand, the breadth of the issues here.
Right.
Better than anybody I know. And so,
right.
I want to relearn. I want to listen. It's but at the same time, it's I talk to my parents' generation, and even they were and my parents were, my mother was a freedom fighter. Yeah. She was out there. She was in, but even my father came, he's I got to rethink all these heroes that we grew up with. I'm like, yeah,
I,
they weren't heroes. Yeah.
I would be remiss not to tell you, Noah, without getting too deep into it, that just as I'll just say this, just as the analysis of the election spent a lot of time talking about, if it wasn't for the black folks in Georgia, we don't know where we would be, or this, that, and the third. And the truth of the matter is, African Americans have been saving America for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And
A long time.
In the face of all that has happened and all that has been done. So what I would say is, yeah, there's a lot of unlearning, and there's going to be efforts to stop that unlearning.
I'm sorry, but like, yeah, who did we learn about from Black history growing up?
We learned about individuals who made inordinate. I mean, no disrespect to anybody, but I think about how we learned about. I mean, there obviously were freedom fighters and things that we learned in the mainstream. However, there were people like Crispus Attucks, who was the first black man. I mean, the first person to die in the American Revolution. And I'm kind of like, okay, like
it wasn't enough though.
I think that we don't spend enough time studying the history that is being made today as well.
For sure. Well,
being put in. I mean, one thing that I argue, what I'll tell you, Noah, is that I work with In Demand as well in Detroit. It's an advocacy group for black male educators in schools, and one thing I frequently say is that black folks and black men specifically are really carrying the promise of the school district in a way by not only teaching and providing content to students, but really individualizing their treatment by making sure that they're teaching the whole child, because they're engaging with, and it's not just teachers, they're engaging with students as athletes, they're engaging with students in clubs and things of that nature. And it doesn't take anything away from any of the rest of the teachers, but the fact that there is so little of us even in schools that are predominantly black is problematic. So if we take a look at the things that they are doing, I think it can address or adjust the behavior and policy that's created by school districts. There are people who are making a difference on a day-to-day basis, and that is the norm. That is not the exception, as so many of the negatives are making out to be. And that's not just teachers, that's people.
Oh yeah, my God. I mean, like I went and visited Jalen Rose's school in Detroit. Jalen Rose, David Merritt. Like, there's leadership there every single day that no one hears about. Absolutely. But when it comes, like, just to think about reframing history and understanding it artistically, everybody knows how culture, what is the roots of culture?
Absolutely.
The roots of culture is black culture. Like, culture in America is defined by black culture. So rock, classic rock wouldn't have happened without the blues, right? Or with jazz, hip hop. Hip hop is American culture. It's the only American culture. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows. But but to see a whole, there was a dissidence about the last couple of years that made no sense to anybody.
Absolutely.
So.
And I know we could talk about that forever, but I think that's a perfect segue to talk about low end theory.
Yes.
Because truthfully, what I would tell you, well, I think before I make that point, let's say for a minute, I want you to finish this sentence. Without low end theory, there would be no what?
There would be no, can I say an artist's name?
You could.
I mean, there might be no Tyler, the Creator. There might be no Kendrick Lamar. There might be no, I would say, there would probably be no, there would be no bridge.
There would be no bridge. There may have been creativity and spontaneity, and those things were there before, but there may not have been. I'm glad you said a bridge. And first, before we even answer that, I want you to look at this artwork.
Mm.
Art is intended to explain or answer. And yeah, you got it at the crib. What does this artwork say to you about the music that came about, as well as the positionality? I mean, what was going on at this time? What do you notice?
To me, like, because the visuals of this album just struck hard and struck at home. And so, like, what it mean, like, Low End Theory was recorded in Queen, this is a Queens band, this is a Queens group,
Yes.
and so, like, what's the descendancy of this album? What's the descendancy of the paint? What does it mean?
Yes.
What do the colors mean? And it was so apropos of the times and of history that it just, like, everybody who saw this, everybody knew how important it was from the first second you saw it at the store.
Yes.
Can't put, like, there's something so electric about it and so on that it's almost I put it in the easy top 50 of all time.
In terms of artwork or album?
Artwork and album artwork.
Here's what I'll say about the artwork, what it says to me. In retrospect, hindsight being 2020. Notice where the words, the Low End Theory are.
On the spine.
On the spine, and theory is right at the butt, by the way.
Truth.
Anita Applebaum kind of spoke to
Anita
back here.
Anita.
Notice where the name of the group is. This is a woman. The name of the group is in the womb.
Ooh, see, that's
the group is in the womb.
My God, I didn't think of that.
What is that saying? The group is in the womb. So, and when we talk about low end, obviously there's the discussion about the bottom, the base, from a perspective, but also there's something to be said socially about the low end. And at this point, I mean, I think that this says something about the African-American experience in this country as well. Consider the colors being red, black, and green as well. So, yeah, that's something to consider. And then, okay, so Low End Theory came out September 24th, 1991. And for me, just to put this in context, 1991 is a top 5 year for me. And I have this. I'm probably going to end up having to have conversation with this at some point. This is going to be what's in the comment section. The top 5 years in hip hop, not in order, is 1991, 1996, 1995, 1988, and 2003. Now in 91, the perspective, the place where this album came out was amongst the continuous rise of the West Coast. This was when this year NWA's Niggas for Life came out. You had Ghetto Boys, which wasn't West Coast, it was more the South, but so rap was expanding past New York.
Yeah.
Like in a very, very fast way. Mind Playing Tricks on Me was huge.
Oh, yeah.
Faces Back came out that year. Death Certificate came out that year. De La Soul is Dead also came out that year.
Oh my God.
It's my favorite album of all time. So the context was people were reaching for identity. Ghetto Boys incorporated the blues. The West Coast incorporated funk before the Chronic, because if you think about it and you go back and you listen to Niggas for Life by NWA, that album was based around as much P-Funk as the Chronic was. If you really go back and listen to it. So I was a freshman in high school, and I remember Stacy Winchester came to get me to go to a youth group we were a part of called Kudos. We go to Kudos. Shout out to John Rhymes. Shout out to all my Kudo brothers from Flint. Life-changing experience being a part of that group. And it was different. It didn't sound like what they chose to base their music, the palette by which they chose to base their music around was different for me. And it taught me, and I think it taught the rap crowd, the rap generation, I think it kind of taught us about jazz. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, when you put on Low End and the first song, it actually kind of describes so much about what hip hop, where hip hop came from, and what it was. We had never heard that. We didn't, no one ever just put their finger on. When he says, like my pops used to say, it reminded him of bebop.
And that's the whole album.
That's the whole album. It's like, but that made so much sense to if you didn't understand what was going on there, you now did. So you didn't know where hip hop. Now we had an inside angle on it because we had a lot of friends making music, but we didn't know why they were making music. We didn't make that connection until exactly that time.
Right. Excursions.
Yep.
Is a seminal first song on an album because for me, when he says, my pops used to say it reminded him of bebop. I said, well, Daddy, don't you know that things go in cycles?
Things go in cycles.
The way that Bobby Brown is just ample like Michael. For me, when I went back and I listened to it with a different ear, what I heard was Q-Tip going through his dad's records. Yeah. Excursions samples a song by Art Blakely called
I did not know that.
I did not know You, I think it's called.
Did not know that. That's sick. I didn't even know that.
And it's, if you listen to where they got the chop from, you won't catch it because the count is different. It samples a beat that I believe is in 6/4 time.
Wow.
Into a 4/4 loop.
Oh.
So it's a bebop record.
Yup.
And modernized it. And it did a lot of stuff. I think also
it created an acceptance right there, right? It was an acceptance of history. It's like,
hey,
where we are coming from, this is where we have come from.
Yeah.
Like all music in this country, the essence of it all came from blues and jazz.
Yes. And you can hear, and even in the loop, you can hear the bongos.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, when you called it a bridge, that's perfect. Because it bridged the entire span of African-American music, a century of music up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the jazz that was involved it sampled Jimmy McGriff.
Yeah.
It sampled, the famous 5 stair steps break. I think that break was on, I want to say it was on Jazz, the song Jazz. Which to me, the song Jazz is complete East Coast.
It's nasty. I mean, it was mine. I mean, there was when you were listening, the first time you listened to it, every song was on. Yeah. Every song was more on than the next. Just but we were so sometimes sophomore albums, third album, you're not expecting it to be as great.
Yeah, right.
Tribe kept getting better. They were and everybody still says this, but they were like the Beatles of hip hop. Everybody was everybody. I mean, Phife had his own way. Tip had his own way. Jacob they all had their own vision, but they all brought it together and highlighted how each other's songs were written. And so you're like, oh my God. So you could sit and listen front to back and get more and more. And I did the same thing probably that you did was, I never put it down, but I hadn't listened to it critically for probably a number of years.
Yeah. And I think that if the purpose of our discussions or my discussions during these podcasts with people is to talk to them about the music that they love, but look at it from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. Really build out the entire context of the record. I think about the sociological effects. For me, again, I was a freshman in high school. So when I heard Butter,
oh my God,
Butter had an effect on the manner in which I viewed male-female relationships. In concert with everything else that I knew, what was real, you know what I'm saying? I mean, and you know, during this time, there were a lot of conflicting. There was the entire this entire ethos about bitches and hoes and and this, that, and the third. And this was, for I think a lot of us, this was a lot more realistic.
It was. I think that, you know, the whole misogynist, you know, like that was a big topic always. And, you know, for every radio host and all that, dude. Yeah. Oh, I don't want to play this because, and I never really believed in that personally, but I did love hearing, you know, them tackle like serious issues about, you know, relationships, like, you know, to talk about date rape on an album. Yes. Classic example of a date rape, and like, you know, to take it from a far different angle, you know, that everybody could relate to, you know, like, hey, let's talk about this, let's talk about that. We're not going to judge it. We're not going to tell you what it's about. But for sure, it wasn't what we had been hearing. You know,
it was, and that was a socially conscious record in a way.
Yeah.
Because I mean,
I don't remember when date rape. I don't even remember what album
date rape was an issue. I remember there being television there. I remember there being sitcoms and things that were kind of dealing with date rape at that time in a different way. And there were other rap groups that were talking about it. There was a group called BWP that made a song called No Means No. No means no, my brother. Yeah. Are you deaf, motherfucker? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Women's perspective. But even when you look at Butter, again, music as a socializing mechanism for people, when he talked about his interest in women that were natural, he talked about weave, hair weave, and contacts being a no-no, while nowadays that's the norm for many women. One thing he said that I ended up looking up, he said, trying hard to look fly, but show you looking dumber. If I wanted someone like you, I would have swung with Jamie Summers. I didn't know who Jamie Summers was.
I did. Well, I'm 4 years older, so like, you know, I was a senior at the time. So
Jamie Summers was the Bionic Woman. That was a spin-off of $6 Million Man. I had no idea.
Well, that's like, you know, that's that little nuance in time right there between our generation, you know, between our ages. But it was an immeasurably important album. I mean, for you know, like that bass line, like when we heard dum 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 dum. But I mean, for Bugging Out, you're like styles upon styles upon styles. What I have.
Yeah, right.
You wanted just to fight for, but you still don't know that.
You know what I noticed about the album was how Q-Tip obviously produced the album largely, and I still to this day can't understand how he was able to make his drum breaks so fat.
Oh my God.
So crisp. And he carried that same thing over to, he actually mixed Mobb Deep's Infamous album.
What? I didn't know that.
Absolutely. So when you listen to Infamous, he co-produced that, I believe, with Havoc. And the drum breaks had that same just slap, but it's clean. So
it's hollowed out too. It's hollowed out. It gives you, it has the right amount of time. It's like the time signature, everything about it though was so on. I just know the word I could say, like even the body painted back and front cover, like I could talk about that alone. Like that was so that's revolutionary right there. That's exposing something completely new. It was like, think about painting a body, you know, front to back. You know, it's like there's more to it than like they were not old artists. You know, Tribe was my age. You know, at the time, like 20 miles from my house, they were making that music.
Right. And
to me, that was a miracle. That was a miraculous thing because they were musicians of epic proportions. You know, I can't imagine making that many good songs in a row. Right. And I don't know any other band that made that many. And I don't know how much time we have, but like to close an album with the Scenario. When that came out across the city, across Long Island, across wherever you were, when you heard the Scenario, everybody went straight up mental. Like everyone knew every single word. And so again, that crossover, that bridge, I don't know in context enough to know, but I can tell you that like these are the times that radio controlled. So so when you got the tapes, you had to know, and like, but every single person knew the word to every one of these songs everywhere.
Right.
And Scenario would just pop off. It was just like you were just like, what? Busta Rhymes. When Busta Rhymes shows up, here we go. Like
so what I've done, I mean, in looking deeper into it, Scenario, the posse cut was like a standard in hip hop at this time. Like the posse cut.
Everybody comes in.
Tribe Called Quest was like a nexus when it came to, the native tongue. So you had Tribe Called Quest, you had De La Soul, you had Queen Latifah, you had Moni Love, you had Beat Nuts, you had
Brand Nubians, you had you had all like the offshoots of like the deeper underground, and then it would just sick.
So that entire movement. And you had to have a posse cut. Everybody had a posse cut. NWA had posse cuts. Everybody had posse cuts. So this was
beast. It's a beast. But everybody killed their verse. I mean, I was like, you died when you heard those verses. Right. Everybody kills it. Like sometimes I hear like and I'm like, oh, that didn't fit at all. That didn't fit. Like sometimes I hear them today, and I'm like, no, don't kill it with some, give us something real, give us a real verse.
And you know what? Who had the most slept on verse on Scenario to me?
Who
absolutely murdered it? Dinko D.
Dinko D. I
flow. What?
Definitely wouldn't have thought. See, wouldn't have been able to name that name. In my distant memory, I could almost.
Dinko D on that song made me want to rap.
That's amazing.
Dinko D made me want to rap. So just a couple of other quick notes about it. I did look into why Check the Rhyme, why rhyme is misspelled, and I actually DM'd Q-Tip and asked him.
What?
And he didn't respond. But I read somewhere that that's just how they name. That's how they just name the song. I mean, and people used to misspell words and name songs. But I was always curious about like was that just the name they turned in and something happened or whatever? So I was really curious about that. They had really those 3 singles, Check the Rhyme. I remember Check the Rhyme video.
Yeah.
On top of the cleaners and everything. It was just, like I said, this was 1991.
Yeah.
Life, and Death Certificate, Apocalypse 91 by Public Enemy, Compton's Most Wanted, Ghetto Boys.
And we had all, I mean, and so just to go back to the vantage point that we were listening to these from, as being on the island, like Long Island suburbs, and then you hear Tip come out with Queens just right up the road.
Yeah.
Insane. It's what made me like want to become a musician. It's what made me, it made everything feel accessible and real because they were also, not that much older than us.
Yeah.
Now I was in my senior year. They were maybe 3 or 4 years older than me making that. They were in their early 20s in that album.
Right.
I think.
And already,
they had made
the infamous line on Check the Rhyme, record industry people are shady.
Yeah.
They were going through a lot of stuff with Jive before this album got recorded. And they had already been exposed to, there was, when they were coming up, there was a quote unquote bidding war, according to the documentary. There was a bidding war for them. Jive won. They put out People's Instinctive Travels on the Path of Rhythm or whatever. And then they went in and they were supposed to be renegotiating or whatnot. And they renegotiated for another one. And it was just a mess. And it just kind of reminds me, it planted that seed. I don't remember there being a seed before that being planted that ended up turning into a decade later after this album came out, this staunch independent seeking by artists, with Master P and Cash Money and, working out their own deals. I think the fact that he said record industry rule 4080, that's something that I don't think will ever go away. Like that wisdom. record industry people are shady, so people watch it back because I think they smoke crack. I don't doubt it. Look at how they act. Like, look at this is the whole artist versus creative conflict. I mean, artist versus business conflict that we talked about earlier.
It's really hard. It's hard to, when you start working on the money side, which is important, and I'm not overlooking it. And I have a lot, I've learned it over the years of how to deal with it and how to make money despite all the obstacles.
Yeah.
And it's like, but yeah, even we would listen to that and be like, what do they mean? And later it became very important to understand what they meant. When we were artists and we were playing at the wetlands, and then we were playing in knitting factories, we were in the city playing. And then you're like, and I learned a lot of what I know from people who grew up here in Motown, being like, no, that's not how it works. Ernest Kelly from Motown, I met with Ernest Kelly, who's a brilliant person. He's like, this is not how it works. When you play, this is how much you're going to charge. This is how much you're worth, but you're not valuing yourself, son.
Right.
I remember, and I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you have to value yourself, or how can you have value if you don't value yourself?
There you
that was
go.
one of those words of wisdom. And so, but for some, Tribe ended up in this scenario when they were very young,
Yes.
What, 20, 19, like when they're already making big music, big hits.
Right. I'm not completely sure. I don't completely remember, but again, going back to the beginning, art should force you to ask. And it made our generation ask, like, well, what does he mean?
What does he mean
by saying that? I'm 14. Does he mean that, it's not all dreams and wonder when you get signed to a record label? And then you listen to deeper in the album, and that theme permeates a lot of the album.
It does. It's rap promoter. It's all over the album.
Yep, rap promoter. You want to be in the business with Diamond D and Sadat X and Lord Jamar? You want to be in the business?
It's easy.
Right. You never really really processed it because it was just built into our minds from listening.
And Rod, we have to address one thing from this. I know we're way over our time, but but hold on. When Sky Pager came, when we listened to Sky, when we're like, wait. When we when he talked, when Sky Pager came out, we're like, everybody knew what was up with that song, and that, think about how that predecesses all of time right now, in the cell phone era, the pager was the predecessor of the cell phone.
Yes.
And, there were so many connotations that went with the pager. The pager for us, the only people we ever paged was your drug dealer, at the time. I don't know if you remember that.
91. Yeah.
But you just hit, you'd be like, yo, if you had a pager, a Sky Pager, for people who never heard of that, it was a little device that you'd have to it was almost like before text message, you text message.
We have to explain to people what pagers are.
We have to, and I get that, and I never age myself. Age is beauty, but it is funny to think that you'd be hitting up yo, how do I page, when you couldn't figure out how to do it. You knew you had status if you had a pager, and he talks about it.
Right.
Yeah. And you're and then that just elevated everything to ungodly proportions where you're like, these are the gods right here.
Hip-hop and technology.
Hip-hop and technology.
And Sky Pagers were a status symbol.
For sure.
And the drums. See, I'm listening to the production.
Yeah.
The drums, crazy.
Oh.
Crazy. You know what the East Coast Stomp is, don't you?
No. Talk to me.
You ever know what the East Coast Stomp was?
No.
East Coast Stomp was, if you go back and you watch the Case of the PTA video, I think it was before that. The East Coast Stomp was I'm not about to do it because I'm 43. I'm sitting here.
Don't worry, I won't do it. I promise not to rap.
Drums, when you talk about Sky Pager, I just think about the drums and just slapping.
Killing it. We'd call that the one drop, the click, boom, the bang, all of those things as they dropped, but at the same time, it was exposing everybody to culture. you know.
Yeah.
And so it was above and beyond all things. It was music that was accepted, played, the radio could play it.
Yeah, it was.
You could listen to it. And that's hard to actually put into context now when there are no walls.
It was.
There was a lot of walls back then. Like, it was almost a miracle to think about anybody coming up when they did.
Yeah.
Like, think about how you had to come up, by making a song and passing a tape to somebody.
Yeah.
Some AR guy got it, over at the club in the, like, you're like, how did that even happen? Or maybe they slipped it to just the right DJ on the radio.
Right.
I played one. And so now, like, the walls are actually kind of different. There still are walls.
There's still gatekeeping that happens.
There's gatekeeping.
Brandon said where you got to spend $100K. There's still gatekeepers that are involved, but I think that the reason that this was able to kind of sum all this up, I think that the reason that this album permeated the culture was because it was very honest.
Yeah.
And it provided a very humble contrast to what we were starting to see hip hop become.
Yeah. Well, right, because the album before that like had all the stars was definitely Public Enemy or NWA, and like, those were amazing albums, but they would not play them on radio.
Absolutely. At the time that this album came out, gangster rap was dominant. Like, I mean,
sure.
And I mean, I think people talk about the power dynamic shifting in hip hop after the Chronic. I think it was before that. I think it was NWA myself.
Definitely.
The contrast between three guys from Queens who, like girls and wore beads and shit versus NWA. That NWA had like an iconic, like a caricature of aggression, and I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I thought it was very revolutionary. I thought it was a product of counterculture. I thought it was a product of. It was a different slant to. It was a different slant to the democratization of music, like where you can come out and say what you were saying, and it was shocking, but you knew that it was built out of a certain level of rage. But by the time in Niggas for Life came out, it had become kind of like caricature-ish in a way.
Well, similar, like, remember telling you about like looking up to the Twin Towers as a kid, you're like this. So when that came out, I could only look up to it like the Twin Towers.
Yes.
I couldn't enter those towers.
Yes. And NWA, not only because of what they were saying, but the production quality and how raw it was.
I mean, we loved it. We listened to it. I remember listening to it till it, like, the tape fell out, like it broke in my car, but like what the truth was we could only watch that. We weren't participants yet, because it was just something that we knew something was up, but we didn't understand it. We knew there was violence that was unfair. We knew revolution was important, but we didn't know how to participate in it.
Right, exactly. And so Tribe was a contrast and a piece that was very connected to the rest of the timeline. Just like artists like in today's world, artists like J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar, the reason that they stick out so much is because they are so anti the rest of what is happening in commercial hip hop.
And that's the only reason I use those specific artists before, which, like, looking back on, like, what I wanted to clarify that point, that I like when you look at albums in their entirety, not single drops, Kendrick puts out, not only does he put out his voice. Yeah. It's like, I'm just like, when Kendrick's out, I had that same feeling as when Tribe came out.
Okay.
And when like that album, like, I'll put on that album, like Kendrick's album, Mad City, like, I listened to Mad City 500 times.
Yeah.
That was my gym album where I was just like, I couldn't absorb enough of it. I couldn't take in enough of it. I couldn't, and I can't understand it. It was a story. It's a story. It is. Right? And so when I look at an album like that, Kendrick, like, I don't, like, outside of, like, like you said, Mobb Deep, Wu, there wasn't many albums that in entirety told that whole story of an exact time as
Yeah.
well as Kendrick did. And even Tyler, why I love Tyler the Creator, because again, that anti-commercialism and
Yeah.
just Tyler being just like, it wasn't relative Tyler to Kendrick, but like when Tyler the Creator came out, I was just like, in terms of just album production,
Yeah.
abstractions and defiance, I was like, this is monster. And I hadn't had that experience since Tribe, De La Soul, Black Sheep, Brand Nubians, I hadn't had that experience with hip hop. It was like kind of an era lost for me. Now that was probably on me. It wasn't on hip hop, it was on me. Obviously, there was a billion amazing albums and artists that came out. So
Right, absolutely. And so I guess we'll end it by saying that, by going back to that question. Without Low End Theory, there would be no. I think that without Low End Theory, there would be no. I would say and I hate to say this, and I have to be honest.
Mhm.
I think that without Low End Theory, we wouldn't know who Jay Dilla is outside of Detroit. To a degree, Jay Dilla is
totally with you on that. Like,
completely brilliant, but I feel is when I hear Low End Theory, I hear Jay Dilla before Dilla became Jay Dilla. I think also without Low End Theory, there would be no that connection would not be as firm as it is, because when you look at what became known as the beat culture of LA with the Flying Lotus and the K-Tronada and the place where a lot of that work was being done was called the Low End Theory, that involved, the beat culture or whatnot. And I think that instrumental, like avant-garde hip hop owes its existence to Low End Theory and Tribe in general.
I completely stand by that. Just like I can relate it to classic rock, where, without the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, who were both groups who, they borrowed from lots of different genres, right? The Beatles borrowed from genres, but at a certain point, they took it, they owned it, and it became them. And so, when you're working with inspirations, eventually the inspirations absorb into you, and then you become them. And then you are them. And so when you think about the Beatles albums like Magical Mystery Tour or Abbey Road, or think about those like pivotal albums in history,
Right.
or Jimi Hendrix, Axis Bold as Love, where all of a sudden you are the synthesis of everything you've learned and all you've become. And the reason I could close on this is because as an artist, we can only be the synthesis of who we are and what we've learned. And the reason I want to stay a lifetime learner, and the reason I think, Rod, me and you could vibe for 1,000 hours is because you as a teacher, me, I just want to learn. I'm a lifelong learner, every single day we can pick little parts of albums, of art, of technology, and synthesize them into what we're going to create today.
Yeah.
And all we have this is all we have is this very second.
Absolutely.
The present is all I believe in. And so, while we have had errors of our past, and we have a lot of errors to correct, I believe in the spirit and the renaissance of the future. And I hope we could find that bridge. And I believe that the roaring 20s is upon us. And we're going to
That's not, you said that before. You said that when we talked a couple months ago.
Yeah.
That there's going to be our hope is that there's going to be a revolution.
Yeah. Break it all
in the coming months, and not a revolution necessarily of that's based around negativity, but I think that people, if I could say, I think that people will have grown to appreciate the great things that we created and we didn't create.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of bad music that happened during the times of the great music.
Yeah,
and we can.
but listen, I'm talking about, you know what I'm saying? I'm not sitting still.
Right.
This is all over with. This is gonna be like the greatest summer in the history of the planet.
I want to live through that lens for the rest of my life. You know, like, and as you know, you said it best when you said at the beginning of the whole show, like, success to me is doing what you want to do.
Yeah.
There's no more to it. And if you could find success within your purpose, within your vision, and even if you don't have that vision and you have to work every single day, just imagining that vision, that's also success.
Absolutely.
But but my hope is for a future that we can all learn from each other, create a more equitable society, and then have like literally probably the most important party ever in American culture, which is going to be like, we scraped the belly of the plane when we came in for this landing over the last couple of years. Right. And we learned a lot about ourselves. Like, we learned a lot about, even within ourselves, the things we had to unlearn. I had to unlearn things that I still want to learn. Like, but I believe when you hit that rock bottom, that we can rise up. And I agree. And then maybe next time we'll talk about De La Soul, 3 feet high and rise.
Oh, we can do that too. So we want to definitely give a shout out to A Tribe Called Quest. I want to give a special shout out before we go to Bob Power, who mixed the album, and Tom Coyne, who mastered the album. The same person who mastered Billy Ocean.
Is that real? Are you serious?
And Life Is Too Short and Single Ladies by Beyonce.
I did not.
Low End Theory. And I'm always a person who gives honor to those people behind the boards for laying a soundscape that has permeated the last 30 years. Just about a record that is timeless and something that we should all listen to. I do want to take the time to thank our sponsors, Leon Speakers, E-Digging, Grove Studios. You can follow us at Zero Noize Podcast, and let me do something real quick. Now there we go. Okay, now we're good to go. Okay, so Zero Noize with a Z podcast. Thank you for joining us, and I do want to say, Noah, thank you very much for your spirit and the manner in which you have driven innovation in your own company. I know that it's an inspiration for those of us who have been involved with you for the last year. And I just appreciate all you do. And I'm glad that you came in the early days of me trying to make this podcast work. Thanks for taking a chance on this. And, thank you very much.
Hey, Rod, appreciate you more than you can imagine. You're an inspiration to me and all of us at Leon. Thank you. Let's get the work done.
Peace. Absolutely.
So, have a great Friday night, everybody. Hey, do you have a drink near you?
I got the bottle.
All right, you got the bottle. You ready for one little toast?
We're gonna do that off camera. Let's end it first, and then we'll go. But I do want to tell everybody again: follow us at Zero Noize Podcast, Noize with a Z, and just look out for us next week. We'll see you next week. Peace,
everybody. Rod Wallace. Yes. Thank you.